What's up, guys? You're watching Li-Fi TCG. Just got back from China, Guangzhou, the tournament organized by MTA. They just call themselves like the Magic Tournament Association. Just TO over there runs some decent tournaments. So the weekend was Legacy on Saturday and then Pauper on Sunday. I'm just going to do the quick Pauper video for now, and then I might do the Legacy video about the deck I played there and upload that in the next few days. So the deck that I played in the Pauper event, 6 rounds, so reasonably sized, was Tron. So Tron, one of the more popular decks in the format right now, especially because of the fact that it's one of the decks in the format that can take advantage of the Arcum's Astrolabe. So of course what that lets the deck do is filter the copious amounts of colorless mana into some colored mana so you can cast your spells. But in fact the version that I was playing did not take advantage of that. And I was playing a version with signets instead, namely Simic Signet. So why did I choose to do that? Mostly I felt that the mana curve just worked a lot more smoothly, especially with the London Mulligan. So you have a much higher chance of opening on a hand that has turn 3 Tron. Like either you just draw it naturally or you have 2 pieces and a map. So not having to break up your sequencing of Tron land, Tron land, Tron land, colored mana, which works with the Signet of course because it can be cast off colorless from the Tron lands, but the Astrolabe you need to take one turn of not playing a Tron land to play an island. Of course a snow island, not like a normal island like this one. But that can quite often slow you down a bit. So in testing I found that the Signet build was a little bit more effective. I'd say it's like more explosive at the cost of being slightly less consistent. So I'll just get onto the entire list for you now. So starting with the lands, that's another benefit of playing no Astrolabe, is that you don't have to play so many snow islands. So we have the 12 Tron lands. Then we have 1 Mortuary Mire. This is pretty standard, it's very good in the mid and the late game just for recurring Mulldrifters and Mnemonic Walls, and you can of course flicker it to reuse it. Then we have 4 Remote Isle. This is maybe a slightly unusual choice. A lot of people, when you tell them that you're not playing Astrolabe, they think that like you sort of like flood out too much because you have less cantrips in your deck, because you cut 4 Astrolabe, which is a cantrip, for basically 4 signets which aren't a cantrip. But because you're aiming to like curve out with like ramp kind of with just Tron lands and signets, in most games you can afford to just cycle these, and of course the Astrolabe build can't afford to play so many cycling lands because it needs to fill the mana base with snow islands. And in the games where you want to be like playing Forbidden Alchemy on turn 3 or whatever because you have like a bit of a slow hand, you can just play your Remote Isle on turn 2 and it doesn't really slow you down anyway. Or you go like Remote Isle turn 1 tapped, turn 2 Tron land Signet, then evoke Mulldrifter or Alchemy. Like if you do have a bit of a slow hand, like it doesn't really slow you down too much. Like sometimes when you have like hands with map, then it can be a little bit clunky. But in those situations, like it means you don't have 2 Tron lands already, because otherwise you could just go Tron land map, Tron land crack it. So in that situation, you probably don't want to crack your map straight away anyway, because you don't know what Tron land you want to get yet. So there's, I think, very little downside to playing so many remote isles. And I definitely think 4 is correct. Then 3 Cave of Temptation. So this is the new upgrade to the like Unknown Shores slash Painted Bluffs slash Shimmer and Grotto, like what the old versions used to play. You just need a certain number of rainbow colored sources, and these are the best ones now. So the activated ability is actually quite relevant, making your Mulldrifter 4/4 so it can trade with the Mirror Enforcer or block for Skyfisher. One game was important, making my Wretched Gryff bigger than my opponent's Wretched Gryff. One game I used it to make my Dinrova Horror 6/6, so my opponent couldn't profitably block with the Gurmag Angler anymore. The +1/+1 counter ability does come up quite a lot, and that's another upside to this build over the Astrolabe version. And then the last 2 cards, 1 island. So the last 2 lands, not last 2 cards, we've still got all the spells to go through, of course. So the 1 island, it's obviously not for like Ghost Quarter or Assassin Trophy or anything like that, because in Pauper none of these cards exist. The Geomancer Gambit recently got printed, which is kind of like a Ghost Quarter, but nobody plays that card, so it's not worth worrying about. The reason why you just play 1 island is so you have an untapped blue source. So if you have a hand that's like, especially off a mulligan, so like you might not have the smoothest hand, if you have like 2 Urza's Mines and the Expedition map, then you can just go turn 1 Urza's Mine map, turn 2 another Urza's Mine, crack your map, get the basic island, then play island, and then play Alchemy or Mulldrifter, so you're like not stuck. It's worth playing 1 basic island just for that. So yep, that's why it's in the deck. And then the last card, the last land, so bringing up to 22 lands, we have 1 Radiant Fountain. Because I have so much filtering, like with the signets, and this can cast a signet, so it doesn't stuff up your mana too much. And I just felt like this was an effective tool versus the aggro decks, just to stabilize a bit, and of course you can flicker it as well. So maybe this is a bit like greedy or silly. Like sometimes I notice like the life gain is really relevant. Sometimes I notice it'd be better if it was a colored source. But I'm overall not too unhappy with it at the moment. If I was going to make one change from this, I would cut one of these, because it's too annoying in the early game when you have a hand that's like these are your 3 lands, and now you can't play a 3 mana spell like a I keep saying like Mulldrifter and Alchemy. Obviously they're really key consistency tools for the deck. So this combo only gives you 1 colored mana and 1 colorless mana, which is not really good enough. So probably to reduce the likelihood of that happening, I will cut one of these caves for either another basic land, probably just another island, or perhaps some kind of Rupture Spire effect. So like, I think there's a few of these now that are all functionally the same, like Rupture Spire or Transguild Promenade or Gateway Plaza. So the cards that are like, they come into play tapped and then you sacrifice it unless you pay 1, but then from that point onwards it's just like an unconditional rainbow land. I think maybe having one of those in the mana base could be alright. They're not very commonly played, but I think just with a bit of gold fishing, they really don't seem too bad. But if you're not a fan of the idea, then yeah, like I say, just another island would probably be fine. So yeah, that's the mana base, 22 lands. I think that's pretty standard right now. You can't really go lower than that, but you can add a 23rd if you want. I've played stuff like Quicksand in the past, but it just doesn't seem that appealing right now. Having to lose a land to deal with the creature is really not great, and then stuff like Ninja is not very popular at the moment anyway, so it doesn't matter. The artifacts, 4 signets, Simic Signet. You'll see soon why we play the green signet and not any of the other ones. 4 expedition map, of course. Some people like Hampus online, I think, or Hellsour, I can't remember which, are cutting maps. I really don't think you can afford to do that. It's too important to play 4, and then the opportunity cost of having lots of maps is really reduced because we have the 4 remote isles anyway, as well as the Mortuary Mire, and even the Radiant Fountain or the +1 counters off the cave if you have to. So there's lots of different late game options for the map to do stuff. You don't necessarily just like flood on mana if you draw all of your maps. And then of course 4 Prophetic Prism, and the last artifact I'm playing 1 Prismatic Lens. There were a few people at the tournament who had to ask the judge if this was legal or not. I've got the Ultimate Masters version, which has been upshifted to uncommon. Of course it's common in Time Spiral. But yeah, so the Prismatic Lens, I just wanted like a 5th signet slash prism effect. If I was allowed to play 5 signets or 5 prisms, I would obviously just do that instead. But Prismatic Lens does the job well enough, and I think it slots into the mana base in the way that makes sense. So yeah, it's just like a way to tweak the numbers a little bit. Not unhappy with it. I think it's better than other options. Like Mind Stone is not very good because not adding a color is pretty awful, and then once you're past that, you kind of have to look for 3 mana options like Simic Cluestone or something, which I think is just too expensive. You really want to have it down on turn 2, so Prismatic Lens is really the only option. Yep, so that's the artifacts. Then the creatures, 4 Mulldrifter, really stock, synergy with Flicker, synergy with big mana, so you can play it as either divination or as a blocker slash attacker. Doesn't really need too much explanation, just seen it 4 of every version of the deck. 3 Mnemonic Wall. Some people only play 2 of this card. I really like 3. It's always what you want to find in the late game, and you don't really want to be panicking about having these like getting countered and you running out. You can't really play 4 obviously because they're quite dead early, but I do like having the 3rd one. And then you'll also see that I'm playing like 2 Flicker and 2 Pulse, for example, so it just like synergizes with having more walls, and 2 Dinrova Horror is kind of similar as well. So you're just trying to like maximize on the Flicker package. I'm not playing any other, I'm not playing Capsize and I'm not playing Rolling Thunder, especially when you have Signets as ramp. You can very easily, even without Tron, cast this on like 2 and 4 or 5, which is quite good to help stabilize. And then I think it's just like the best win condition with Flicker and stuff. Rolling Thunder is quite okay at the moment because there's a few, the Ephemerate decks rely on lots of weenie creatures, and it's good to clear them up with Thunder, but I'm playing another option to help deal with that instead, which you'll see in a minute. And then the last 2 creatures I played were 2 Elvish Rejuvenator. This card can be really strong. Digging 5 deep to look for a land and then put it directly into play is sometimes exactly what this deck wants to do. 2 problems with this card is that it's just like a little bit too inconsistent. Sometimes you hit the wrong land, in which case it's just like a 3 mana rampant growth. Being a creature means it has synergy with Flicker and Pulse, which is okay, but that's quite marginal. So yeah, often you just hit the wrong land, so it doesn't really accelerate your mana much, at least until later when you find the final piece to get Tron together. And then sometimes it just bricks completely, like you just look at 5 cards and there's no lands there, which is basically like terrible. You know, you waste your entire third turn to just play a 3 mana 1/1. It's a little bit too inconsistent. And the final reason why this card is not great is because when you have the clunker hands, often your colored source is a remote isle, which of course doesn't cast Rejuvenator, right, because it's the wrong color. So yeah, I think I was a little bit too hung up on like the fact of my Simic Signet's producing green. Just trying to like maximize that as much as possible to like feel like I was like having enough excuses to not play Astrolabe, if you kind of get what I'm saying. But I think the Signets are probably good enough, but this card's not necessarily correct. So I think one of these definitely should be either the third Forbidden Alchemy. You haven't seen the Forbidden Alchemies yet, but I think one of these should be either the third one of that or a Compulsive Research. And the second copy, maybe you can keep it, or it should be something else as well. Yeah, I don't like Impulse in this deck because you have Signet as the extra turn 2 plays instead. You'd typically rather just ramp into like a more powerful spell like an Alchemy, for example. So yeah, probably not too impressed with the Rejuvenators over the weekend. Then the spells, we have 2 Alchemies, 2 Flicker, 2 Pulse, and 2 Teachings. So this is all pretty standard. Some people only play 1 Flicker. With the triple Wall and the 2 Dinrova Horror, I think 2 Flicker is good. I just like the being able to sort of throw one away in the mid game and not have to worry about like a random relic or a Bojuka Bog. You always have another copy ready to go later on, and the same is also kind of true for Pulse. And also Pulse is a bit less dead in this build compared to the Astrolabe versions, because we have 4 copies of the Cycling Land, so you can often just like cycle the land on turn 2 and then Pulse it back. But is that even possible? No, the color mana wouldn't work. But yeah, turn 3 or 4 or so you can get that going. Can help you stabilize a little bit. And it just, in general, it means your pulses are less likely to be dead, so it's less bad to have 2 of them. And I think Entropy's latest list, he's playing only 1 pulse in the 75, but he's playing 1 Weather in the sideboard as well. So I'm playing 2 pulse, 1 Weather main, none on the side, so like the amount of life gain is roughly the same. That's how I kind of look at that at the moment. So yeah, this is pretty standard package for Tron. Just the dig recursion setup. Yeah, so in addition to that, I'm also playing 1 Deep Analysis, just with the Elvish Rejuvenators and the ramp from the Signets. I wanted like another big counter advantage spell. This is okay, but I'm not totally sure that it's necessary. It's nice that you can mill into it off the Forbidden Alchemies and then get some more cheap card advantage that way. But costing 4 mana is sometimes a little bit awkward, like that's quite a lot. You'd often rather be casting like Teachings or something instead, but at the same time that's not always the most suitable thing either. Sometimes you just want the card advantage. So 1 Deep Analysis is definitely pretty solid, but I'm not totally sure about the inclusion. Then onto the disruption. So we have 5 disruption spells main deck. So 2 counter spells is pretty common. 1 Dispel, copying Entropy's list. I think this is pretty good. It's good against stuff like Fling or Pyroblast, a lot of the aggro stuff. And then in the mirror, just being able to stop Flicker and stuff for 1 mana is pretty solid. You often just want to be like the combo deck and force your stuff through your opponent's counters, so Dispel is the best option for that because it's only 1 mana. And then for the other counterspell, some of the Astrolabe versions are playing actual counterspell because they can have more islands, so they can actually cast it. The old non-Astrolabe versions usually either play like Condescend or Prohibit. I'm playing 1 Memory Lapse, so what this does is counter the spell and then put it on top of the controller's library. So unlike Prohibit or Condescend, it's just like unconditionally counters any spell, no matter how much mana they have behind or whatever the mana cost was. So this used to be really strong back when Geomag Angler and Foil and Gush were really popular, because forcing them to pay the alternate cost and then putting it back on top of their library made it really hard for them to cast it a second time. Geomag Angler still played in like small amounts, but not so much anymore. But even with those kind of disappearing from the metagame a little bit, I still like Memory Lapse just because it's like unconditional. A lot of the time during the weekend I was using it to counter Mnemonic Walls and Tron mirrors, and of course Condescend and Prohibit not very good at doing that. So pretty happy with Memory Lapse. Occasionally in a resource war you can even use it to like counter your own spell in response to your opponent's counter, to just like put it back on your deck to try and draw it the next turn, but I don't think I've ever actually done that. Then 1 Fog is really common, so typically that's usually Moment's Peace. You know, you cast it from your hand once and then from your graveyard for the flashback. I'm playing 1 Tangle, so I do have to admit that there's a lot of stuff that Tangle is really bad against. So what Tangle does is it fogs, so prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, and then attacking creatures don't untap in their controller's next untap step. So in a way it's kind of a double fog, just like Moment's Peace is a double fog. The spots where it doesn't work is either your opponent plays a bunch of stuff in their second main phase, so it's not really a double fog because you're going to be dead to the new set of attackers, or they play like Flicker or Core Skyfisher or something to pick up some of their attackers and replay them again, so they'll be untapped for the next turn, or their creatures have Vigilance, which isn't really common in Pauper at all really, but sometimes people just untap their creatures anyway, like they have Quirion Ranger or Needle Sentinel, so they'll just untap their creatures anyway, and your Tangle, the secondary effect, didn't really do anything. Or the dangerous creature wasn't even one that was attacking, so if it was like Timber Watch Elf, it only says the attacking creatures don't untap, so Timber Watch Elf will be ready to go the next turn for whatever other 1/1 your opponent played post-combat. But even with all these loopholes, what I really often find is that because you only have 1 Fog in the deck, in the matchups where you need it, you often end up looping it with Mnemonic Wall. That's like something you really have to do. And when you have Moment's Peace as your 1 Fog, like if you flash it back, then it's exiled forever and you can't loop it with the wall. So because you really need the wall loop with the fog, the upside of having flashback on Moment's Peace is really often, like, it just goes unused. And I find that the upside of the can't untap on the Tangle is worth still, even with those drawbacks, it's still better than flashback, I think, on Moment's Peace, and better than playing like just fog for 1 mana, for example. Like the 2 mana Tangle is worth it. Yep, so that's what I think about Tangle. The other thing is that even if your opponent knows you have Tangle, they'll often be like, okay, I'm just going to attack with half my creatures, to play around Tangle, and then next turn, then even if I Tangle them, sorry, I'm like telling this hypothetical from the perspective flipping back and forth, it's very confusing. So if my opponent will often say, okay, I'm only going to attack with half my creatures because Li-Fi TCG has Tangle and he's going to make them not untap. So half my creatures will untap, and then the other half will attack him for lethal. But when you're not dealing the maximum damage possible, it's often really easy to play around that because your deck has life gain as well. So they might attack with only half the guys for 6 damage, and then you can just completely negate that with Pulse anyway. So yeah, so they try and play around Tangle by not overcommitting with all of their attackers, but then you can punish them for that anyway. So yeah, Tangle is pretty good, I think. Then one Weather the Storm, quite commonly played in the main deck now. It's really easy to generate a big storm count. You just chain a bunch of like Prophetic Prisms and Signets and stuff. Ghostly Flicker as well. You can target your Urza's Tower and Prophetic Prism, and it's basically a mana Morphos, like a 0 mana cantrip. So it's pretty easy to generate a few storm. You can gain like 15 to 20 life, no problem. And then both the like burn decks as well as just the like generic mid-range decks have a pretty big problem killing you after that. So definitely a solid one of. And these spells are basically the reason why you play the green Signet, because often you'll play like turn 1 mine map, turn 2 power plant, crack your map, turn 3 tower, that's 7 mana, play Signet, that's 5 mana, and then you have 5 mana plus the Signet is 6, so that's teachings plus then you have the green mana for either of these. So that sequence comes up relatively frequently, and yeah, even though you have like Dinrova Horror and teachings flashback and stuff, that's mostly like a late game thing where you have time to cast it with the Prism or the Cave of Temptation and stuff. You do want the green Signets early on. And then the last card, Claws of Wirewood. So not common in paper, but it is common online. 4 mana, 3 damage to each creature with flying and each player, and it has cycling 2. So it kills every Delver, every Fairy, every Hawk, and every Skyfisher, which is at the moment, and every Mulldrifter, which is not good for you, but your late game should usually be better than your opponent's, especially if your opponent's playing like the Jeskai Hawk deck, so you don't really care. And even if you do care, you can often make your Mulldrifters 4/4 with the Cave, so they don't even die to this. Yeah, it's just a very, very high impact card against the most common form of the like fair mid-range decks that exist at the moment, and it really stops them from going under you with like a super fast Flint Hawk start, which is one of the only ways they can really beat you anyway. In the matchups like the Mirror, where it's not very good, you can just cycle it. Yeah, so this is kind of like the Rolling Thunder replacement that I was sort of implying when I was talking about that card. Unfortunately in the tournament I didn't face the matchups where I needed to use this, but again it just cycles, so definitely a worthwhile one of, I think, to play at the moment. Because there were definitely decks at the tournament where it would have been good, I just didn't end up facing them. And then the sideboard, so 4 Hydroblast, because burn is not the greatest matchup. Some number of them is good against affinity as well, but you probably don't want all 4. And then if your opponent's playing like the Kiln Fiend deck or Inside Out, they're also alright, but those are not so popular anymore with no gush. 2 Moments Peace, so you want the Tangle main deck, because when you only have 1 copy you need to loop them, but when you're boarding up to more fogs you can afford to waste a few just by flashing them back. So in those cases Moments Peace is a bit better than Tangle, so that's why you have Moments Peace in the board and with the 1 Tangle main. One Electrickery, pretty standard versus any like random token decks, but mostly versus Elves and Delver. Definitely a very swingy card in the matchups where it's good. Unfortunately, I didn't play against any of those, but that's how it goes sometimes. One Coalition Honor Guard. I don't know if this is correct. This is basically like the Pauper version of Spellskite. So it's kind of okay against burn because it redirects all the bolts, but maybe it's too slow. It's kind of okay against like mono white heroic and Bogles, but maybe it's too slow and maybe you just like fog lock them and that's how you win anyway. I guess against Bogles it does redirect the fling if they're playing that, which is quite nice, but it doesn't stop Flaring Pain. Versus Affinity, it blocks Frogmite and it disables Battle Rage and Fling, so it's it's kind of okay there as well. It's just a sort of card that has a lot of different applications, but it's difficult to because in any given matchup it's like not close to the best thing you could be doing. It's very difficult to evaluate whether it's actually worth putting it in your sideboard or not. I wasn't totally unhappy with it, but this is probably a slot that you should look to replace, especially if you can get a more specific picture of the metagame that you expect to be facing. Then one Ancient Grudge. So this is for Affinity and mostly for Relic of Progenitus, because your graveyard combo is so strong. You often want to just like Mystical Teachings for this, and then destroy their relic, just like a dredge deck, Nature's Claims or Leyline or whatever. And also you can bring it in versus Affinity as well, just to like randomly kill some artifacts. Entropy says he doesn't do that anymore. Because they have so much stuff that avoids it, like Gearseeker Serpent or Carapace Forger or whatever. But I find that a lot of the draws that you lose when they do something like Frogmite Enforcer really fast, and Ancient Grudge is a fine answer for that sequence. So I'm still boarding it in versus Affinity. One Pyroblast, so good in the mirror and against any like blue control deck. I kind of aimed to beat the mirror by trying to like ramp over the top of it with my Rejuvenators and stuff, rather than try and interact by slowing myself down and like bringing in a bunch of Pyroblasts and stuff like that. But in hindsight, I think that approach is probably wrong, especially because I'm cutting the Rejuvenators now. Yeah, anyway, so I had Rejuvenators and Signets, so the plan was that I would just like ramp faster and get my combos off quicker, and my Tron would be more consistent with the 4 Rejuvenators, but it turned out that that wasn't exactly the case. So yeah, with that in mind, you probably want more Pyroblasts, because you just want to counter their Mnemonic Walls and their Ghostly Flickers and stuff. So you could even play like Exclude possibly as well. Yeah, so you definitely want more of that kind of effect, I think. But then I have one card that's not very commonly used, one Scour from Existence. Basically just for the mirror. If you get this off in like the early or mid game, then you still have all your mana, but your opponent then has to like scramble to find their follow-up Tron piece so they can cast their spells again. And by the time they do that, you can often find a wall to get this back, and then you hit them with it again. It's like a similar dynamic to just Khan Liberated in modern Tron in the mirror. So I think this card is really good. Even though I played against the mirror 3 times, I only drew it twice, and one of those times I didn't have Tron myself, so I just got unlucky and I couldn't play it. But the other time that I drew it, it won me the game basically on its own. So I think this card is definitely worth playing. I'm kind of a little bit surprised that more people don't use it. The other thing is that it answers Wretched Gryff, which is something a lot of people have in the mirror, because Pyroblast doesn't kill it and it beats Mulldrifter, so unless you find Dinrova Horror, which isn't very good against Gryff anyway, you don't really have any outs to it. So having a remover spell that hits Gryff, not even really Gryff, but especially Ulamog's Crusher, is really strong. Like if they tap out for a Crusher and you just exile it, that's usually fine. And also you can disrupt their wall combos and stuff by exiling those. So yeah, I think this card's pretty strong. And then if you play against some kind of like super weird combo deck, like Tortured Existence or something, you don't have any natural eyes, but they will give you enough time to tutor for this and then exile their Tortured Existence. And then if they don't have another one, normally that shuts off their engine long enough that you can play around their Fury Macabre and stuff. So it's just a nice all around. It's really good in the mirror, and it has some other applications too that I think it's worth playing. Then for Wretched Gryff, so the idea here was that it's really good against Delver, which I expected to be there quite a lot of, because it was basically a side event at like a Legacy tournament. So I expected there to be a lot of people who were like Brainstorm aficionados that wanted to play blue-red Delver kind of decks with Spellstutter Sprite and stuff. And this is one of the best cards you can play there. And even then, it's also good against like the Skyfisher and Hawk stuff, and it's okay in the mirror as well. In reality, I only played against the mirror and against like control decks, so it didn't pay off super well. And you probably don't need all four. This is probably where the like other Pyroblast should come from. But I can't be too disappointed in this card. Because even in the control matchups, you often expect, especially if your opponent's playing like a black heavy deck, that your opponent's going to be boarding in like Duress and stuff, so it's going to be hard to do the flicker combos. So you just want to like assemble your mana and then play these big threats that replace themselves. So yeah, it's a good card. It's just kind of a question of, is it only helping the matchups you're already favoured in anyway, and therefore maybe you don't want to play so many? Or is it only good against like Delver, for example, where you're not necessarily favoured, but it's not a very big part of the meta anymore, so you don't have to worry about it so much. So yeah, that's the full list. I think I've given you a rough idea of what I would change. I think I want to play one Ephemerate in the main deck somewhere, in addition to the two flickers. I think that card's just strong enough to be worth it. And then, yeah, so normally I play Pauper online. So getting into the games itself at this tournament, normally I play Pauper online, where they have the chess clocks. And that took me some getting used to. You know, when you first start playing Magic Online, you got to like click through everything. You might be a bit slow, you might time out once or twice. But you know, I think I've gotten over that online, and especially I play quite a bit in paper as well. So I have that, you know, tournament experience. Like I'm familiar with all the cards in the format. If my opponent plays a card, even if it's in Chinese at the China tournament, I don't have to read it. I know what everything does. And I have like years of tournament experience. I think I can play at like a reasonable pace. But Pauper is definitely like one of the slowest formats of all of Magic, I think. Especially decks like this, they're just super grindy. You do a ton of actions that don't really impact the game a lot. Like casting Mulldrifter, casting all these like cantrips. You often in the game you control like 20 permanents. So in terms of both like dexterity and also planning ahead and managing all your decisions, you have to be really onto it in terms of playing quickly. But of course, because it's like not the most popular format in paper, a lot of people weren't too familiar with what was going on. Like I said, multiple opponents didn't believe that Prismatic Lens was a card that was legal in the format. Multiple people had to read Cave of Temptation. Some people were even reading my Tron lands. Just to give you an idea of like the kind of player that I was playing against. One player played he played Stream of Thought, which is that new like replicate psychic spiral, where you mill your opponent for 4 and then you shuffle 4 of your own cards back and it has replicate. He like played that on me after he Bajuka bogged me, so he just like restocked my graveyard with 8 new cards, and then he like swore or whatever because he realized he made a mistake. And then in the next game, or like a few turns later, he did in the next game he did the exact same thing again. Yeah, like all around it was just a bit clowny. And the reason why I'm saying all this is not to like brag about how good I am or whatever, because obviously I didn't do very well at this event. It's just to emphasize that like in Pauper, games really have like a big tendency of going to time, because the decks are slow and people generally seem to not be so prepared. So in round 1, I played against some like blue-black control deck, and we timed out in game 3. And I think if that happens in Pauper, then your tournament is basically like doomed, because you're basically guaranteed to only play against people who have the like same problem, who either like are playing slow decks or are just slow players, or both. So I drew against blue-black control, then I got paired against another blue-black control player, which I then lost to in the middle of the second game. He timed out. Then I played against what happened after that? Then I played against Affinity, which in game 3 we timed out, but because I had such like an overwhelming board position, like I had Flicker, Wall with like Hydroblast and Fog going, so there was basically no way he could win. And because I was paired down anyway, and my opponent had no points and I had 1, he agreed to concede. So then we had 1 win. And then I played against I think from this point on I only played against Tron players. So I think I lost, and then I won, and then I lost. So the one that I won, my opponent, I had wall flicker with Memory Lapse. So anytime my opponent tries to cast a spell, I just put it straight back on the top of their library. But that tied up a lot of my mana every turn. And my opponent had like a Wretched Gryff in play to block. So it took me ages to like. So my opponent would play every turn. My opponent would play a thing. I'd have to tap 5 mana to like lapse, and then like flicker, wall, get back, flicker and lapse, and then like flicker, wall, get back, Pulse of Murasa, pulse back Cave of Temptation, put 2 counters on my Mulldrifter. So like eventually my Mulldrifter can be bigger than his Wretched Gryff, so I can attack through, and then I'm like slowly killing him that way. And he, even though he had no chance of winning for like probably 5 minutes, he just wouldn't concede. So in the end I won the first round. After 50 minutes or whatever, and we didn't have time for a second game. But then I think the other 2 Tron matches, I just yeah, I think both of them finished within time, so we finally came up against the people that like knew more what they were doing. But yeah, I think those losses, I don't necessarily think they were due to like me playing badly, but it's a little bit hard to tell because obviously this deck is so hard to play correctly. Not having as many Hydroblasts as my opponents probably put me behind, and then maybe I just got a bit unlucky as well, like not getting my mana lining up right, or you know, like my Rejuvenators whiffing or stuff like that. So yeah, so in the end I think I finished 2-3-1, which is obviously a pretty bad result. So sort of after the tournament I was like really convinced that the Signet version was just really bad, and that, I mean, obviously I should just move straight to the Astrolabe version because that's what everybody's doing. You know, like why so many of these players can't be wrong. But I think maybe what I'm gonna try is just adjusting a few cards, sort of like what I alluded to as I was going through. Because like I'm watching, or I was watching Entropy's stream just now, and you know he still has plenty of opening hands where he has like Tron land, Astrolabe, and like no other land. And you know, like if that Astrolabe was a Signet, you could keep that. But now he basically has like 2 colorless lands and no other mana sources. You have to mulligan, and it's just not really ideal at all. And then of course like the nut draws for this deck are way better because you don't have to interrupt your Tron sequencing to play islands, so you can filter your colored mana. So I think I still want the Prismatic Lens. All of this is still fine. All of the artifacts. Then for the creatures, Mulldrifter is still good. I still want double horror because I want 2 win conditions, and I don't want Rolling Thunder because it doesn't synergize with Flicker, and I already have the claws to make up for that anyway. So I think definitely keep these 7, 8, 9 creatures. Then I think I still keep claws just for now, unless the meta shifts, but I think the Hawk, Skyfisher, Mulldrifter decks are still really popular. Claws, Tangle, Weather, Lapse, Dispel, I think all of these are staying as well. Then 2 Pulse, 2 Teachings, 2 Flicker, 2 Alchemy, still good, would keep those. In the mana base, all of the Tron lands, 12 Tron lands, keep all of those. Keep the island, and I think all 4 remote isles is still fine as well. The Mortuary Mire is good. But yeah, I think maybe 3 filter lands is too many. So one of these should either be a Gateway Plaza or Island. And then maybe the Radiant Fountain is unnecessary, but I think I'm keeping that for now. Especially because it's a little bit more difficult for this deck to play Hydroblast on time when you don't have so many islands. Just having an extra little bit of life gain hedge can be pretty solid, I think. So then we have these 3 other slots. So yeah, I think the Rejuvenators probably should be out. I think one of them should be either Alchemy, so a 3rd Alchemy, or a Compulsive Research. So just like a 3 mana blue filtering spell. And then one of these, I want to play 1 main deck Ephemerate. So I guess I would say that's this card. It's going to be 1 Ephemerate. And then the Deep Analysis, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just keep it because it has a lot of synergy with the 3rd Alchemy. you're more likely to mill into it. But this could potentially be something else as well. So the brainstorming I did when I was on the plane on the way back, it could be Seagate Oracle as well, because you cut the 2 Rejuvenators, so you're down on flicker targets. So 1 Seagate Oracle could be okay. Otherwise, 1 Impulse just for a bit more early game consistency, or 1 Prohibit, for example, like any other kind of early interaction. So the one other card that I've sort of considered was 1 Dimir Guildmage, but I think that might be slightly better in the Astrolabe version, just because you have more islands. So, you know, it's a little bit easier to cast. But I just really like the idea of that card as like a late game mana sink, just to maybe help you recover from mulligans a bit better and pressure your opponent's hand, which can be pretty solid in the more controlling matchups. But again, the deep analysis is not really that bad at all. I'm just brainstorming other possible options. So yeah, one of these, either a Compulsive Research or the 3rd Alchemy, and then this one should be a Ephemerate. And then once you've made that swap, I think that deck, at least the main deck, is good to go. And then in the sideboard, maybe trim these. Definitely like all of these. 2 Moments Piece I think is probably the right number. 4 Hydroblasts, maybe these aren't all needed, but the burn matchup is pretty bad still, I think. It's still reasonably popular, but then you just have to sort of evaluate that yourself. Yeah, and then the Honor Guard is a little bit random. Maybe that's unnecessary. And yeah, so and then you can trim some Gryphs as well. So maybe like 1 Gryff in the Honor Guard can be 2 more Pyroblasts to help, especially in the mirror. So yeah. Let me know what you think about that. I know that the Astrolabe version is definitely way more popular right now, and I can see that it has a lot of advantages over this version. Your early game can definitely be more consistent, even if it's a bit less explosive. For example, when you also have a lot more flicker targets, because you have 8 cantripping artifacts instead of only 4. So your mid-game flickers as just like divinations happen a lot more consistently as well. And you can do plays like turn 1 island, and then with or without Astrolabe, and then turn 2 Impulse. So again, like your early game's really consistent, but you just have a bit less ramp and you're less explosive. So there's pros and cons. I'm not confidently going to say that this version is better, but I think it's still at least, you know, reasonably viable. I think maybe the downfall was that the Rejuvenators let me down. They were the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of trying to be like explosive but too inconsistent. So maybe I just want to dial that back, but keep all the signets and stuff. I think there might be some route to success there. So anyway, yeah, I don't want to let the video go on too long. Let me know what you think of that deck list. Whether you have any experience with a similar build like this, you have any card suggestions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So yeah, this is Life by TCG signing up.